There are moments when something in you begins to listen before the mind understands why. Not a thought, not a new idea, but a quiet recognition. As if a door you once passed through has gently opened again. You may have felt it as a fatigue no rest seems to resolve, as a faint distance between how you move through the world and what feels true beneath the surface, or as a subtle pull, wordless and persistent. This is not a space to gather knowledge. It is a space to recall what has never been lost. Nothing here asks for belief, nothing demands effort, only your attention. If something in you recognizes this invitation, remain. Chapter 2. The Forgetting. There was a time when knowing did not come from thinking, when understanding arose through rhythm, sensation, and pause, before life was measured in speed, output, and constant response. That way of knowing was not taken from you. It was gradually set aside. You learned to move faster than your own signals, to override fatigue, to ignore subtle discomfort, to trust explanations more than experience. Little by little, attention migrated upward, away from breath, away from weight, away from tempo, until the body became something you carried rather than something you inhabited. This forgetting did not happen by accident. It was reinforced each time stillness felt unproductive, each time rest carried guilt, each time silence felt empty instead of full. You adapted, and adaptation, when repeated long enough, becomes invisible. The body continued to speak, but its language softened. Sensations became background noise. Signals turned into interruptions. What once guided you became something to manage, not because you failed, but because the world you learned to survive in rewarded disconnection. Time fragmented, attention scattered. Days filled themselves before you could feel their weight, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, you learned to live one step removed from your own center. This distance often disguises itself as normal life. You may recognize it as constant tiredness, as rest that never quite restores, as a sense of effort beneath even simple actions, or as a quiet longing that appears when everything is finally quiet. This is not a flaw to be corrected. It is a consequence of forgetting how to listen inwardly. The body was never meant to be commanded. It was meant to be consulted. When that consultation ends, tension replaces dialogue, control replaces cooperation, and the natural intelligence of the organism is reduced to background support. Yet nothing essential has been damaged. What was forgotten was not erased. It was simply covered by noise, by urgency, by repetition. And what can be forgotten can also be recalled. Not through effort, not through analysis, but through a gradual return to sensation, timing, and awareness. Before anything is practiced, before anything is restored, there must first be recognition. The recognition that the distance you feel is not who you are. It is only how long you have been away. Chapter 3. The Language of the Body. Before words were shaped, the body already knew how to respond. Before explanations, it adjusted. Before interpretation, it sensed. The body does not communicate through conclusions. It speaks in texture, pressure, warmth, contraction, release. Its language is subtle, but it is constant. What we often call intuition is simply this language being heard before it is interrupted by thought. A tightening in the chest before a difficult conversation, a heaviness that appears without reason, a lightness that emerges in certain places with certain people. These are not random sensations, they are information. The difficulty is not that the body stopped speaking, it is that we stopped translating. We were taught to ask the mind first, to explain what we feel before we feel it, to label sensation quickly, stress, anxiety, fatigue, and move on. But the body does not operate in labels. It operates in states. When attention is rushed, sensation collapses into noise. When attention is steady, sensation reveals structure. A subtle pressure may carry a warning. A slow breath may carry relief. A persistent tension may be asking for adjustment, not endurance. This language is not dramatic. It does not shout. It repeats. And repetition, when ignored, turns into intensity. The body is patient, but it is precise. It does not demand perfection. It asks for contact. When you pause long enough to notice weight, to notice temperature, to notice the pace of your own breathing, something begins to reorganize. Not because you are fixing anything, but because attention restores relationship. This is why moments of genuine stillness can feel unfamiliar. The body, finally acknowledged, begins to surface what was held. Sometimes this appears as calm, sometimes as discomfort, sometimes as emotion without a clear story. All of it belongs. Listening does not mean indulging sensation. It means allowing it to complete its message without interference. The body does not speak in sentences, it speaks in patterns. A pattern of holding, a pattern of collapse, a pattern of restlessness, a pattern of ease. Once a pattern is seen, it often begins to soften on its own. This is not control, it is recognition. And recognition changes the relationship. Instead of forcing the body to comply, you begin to move with it. Instead of pushing through, you begin to sense timing. Instead of asking, "What should I do?" the question quietly becomes, "What is already being shown?" This is the beginning of fluency, not mastery, not dominance, but familiarity. The body does not require belief to be understood. It requires presence long enough to notice what is already happening. And when that happens, guidance stops feeling external. It feels immediate, embedded, quietly reliable. Before any practice is introduced, before any method is applied, this listening must return. Because without it, no technique can land, and with it, very little is needed. Chapter 4. The Threshold Practice. There comes a moment when listening is no longer enough, not because it failed, but because something is ready to be met more directly. This moment is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It feels like a pause that lingers slightly longer than usual. A threshold, a point where attention stops circling and begins to settle. The practice you are about to encounter is not a technique in the conventional sense. It does not aim to produce an experience. It does not promise transformation. It is simply a gesture, one that allows the body's intelligence to re-enter the conversation. Nothing here is symbolic. Nothing is imagined. Everything is felt. Begin by allowing your posture to soften, not corrected, not improved, just less defended. Notice where your weight is carried, how the body organizes itself when it is no longer being held together by effort. Then bring your awareness to your hands. They do not need to do anything. They already know how to sense. Hold them in front of you, not reaching, not withdrawing. Simply notice the space they define. At first, there may be very little. A faint warmth, a subtle tingling, or nothing at all. Nothing is missing. This practice does not begin with sensation. It begins with permission. Permission for attention to stay without searching for results. As the hands remain, the nervous system begins to register safety, not conceptually, physiologically. Breath adjusts on its own. Muscles release without instruction. Signals that were muted begin to return at their own pace. You are not directing this process, you are accompanying it. Now, slowly, allow the hands to move closer together, not to touch, only to approach. Notice how perception changes as distance narrows. This space is not mystical, it is sensory. The body recognizes itself through proximity and awareness. If sensation appears, let it be simple. If nothing appears, let that be complete. Both responses are forms of communication. After a few moments, bring the hands toward a place in the body that feels dense, tired, or contracted. Do not place them with intention to heal. Place them with intention to listen. The contact does not need to be firm. It only needs to be present. Here, something important happens. Attention and sensation align. And when they do, the body no longer has to amplify its signals to be noticed. This is why tension often softens here. Why breath deepens without command. Why a sense of quiet arrives unexpectedly. You are not intervening. You are allowing completion. Stay with this for a short while. Not long enough to strive. Not short enough to rush. Time is not measured here, only sincerity. If emotion arises, let it pass through sensation. If thoughts arise, let them drift around the edges. The center remains with the body. This gesture can be done anywhere, sitting, standing, before sleep. In the middle of the day, it does not require silence. It creates it. It does not require belief. It establishes trust. Over time, the body begins to anticipate this contact, not as a dependency, but as a reminder that it does not have to shout to be heard. This is why the practice is called a threshold. On one side, effort and control. On the other, cooperation and timing. Crossing it does not change who you are. It returns you to how you function naturally. Nothing is added, nothing is removed. Something is simply allowed to resume. And once this threshold has been crossed, even briefly, the body remembers the way back. Chapter 5. Integration. Integration does not announce itself. It does not arrive as a breakthrough or a revelation. It moves quietly, almost unnoticed, into ordinary moments. You may begin to sense it in small ways. A pause before responding. A breath that deepens on its own. A moment where tension is felt early enough that it no longer needs to escalate. Nothing dramatic changes, but something fundamental shifts in how you relate to experience. The practice does not remain a separate act. It starts to dissolve into how you sit, how you stand, how you move through transitions. You may notice that certain situations no longer pull you as far from yourself. Not because they disappear, but because your system recognizes them sooner. Integration is not about doing the practice more often. It is about needing it less because listening has become continuous. This is how the body confirms learning, through reduced effort. When integration begins, you stop asking, "Am I doing this correctly?" and start noticing, "I am here more often." Rest becomes more efficient, not longer, but deeper. Attention becomes less scattered. Not because focus is forced, but because there is less internal noise competing for it. You may find that you recover faster from disruption, that emotional waves pass without demanding explanation, that decisions feel less rushed. This is not detachment, it is contact without entanglement. Integration also means recognizing when not to engage, when to pause, when to stop adjusting and let the body complete its own cycle. The practice becomes a reference point, not a requirement. A reminder that cooperation feels different than control. Over time, the distinction between practice and life softens. What remains is a quieter baseline, a sense of being accompanied by your own signals rather than overridden by them. There will still be days of disconnection, moments of haste, periods where attention fragments again. Integration does not prevent this. It shortens the distance back. You return sooner, with less correction, with less judgment, and that is how integration reveals itself not as constancy, but as reliability, a growing trust that when something pulls you away, there is a simple path back, not through effort, not through repetition, but through remembering how to listen in the middle of living. Chapter 6. Resistance and Stillness. At a certain point, something subtle changes. The practice no longer feels new. The listening no longer produces clear responses, and what once felt alive may begin to feel quiet, even empty. This is often where resistance appears, not as rejection, but as doubt, as impatience, as the sense that nothing is happening anymore. The mind looks for movement, for confirmation, for signs of progress, and when none arrive, it concludes that something has been lost. But this stage is not a setback. It is a threshold of a different kind. Stillness is unfamiliar when we are accustomed to feedback. Silence can feel like absence when we expect response. Yet the body does not unfold in a straight line. It moves in cycles of activity and integration, expression and quiet. When the signals soften, it is often because they no longer need to insist. Resistance arises when effort has not yet learned how to rest. There may be moments where you sit with the practice and feel nothing at all. No sensation, no release, no shift you can name. This does not mean the listening has failed. It means the system has settled enough that it no longer needs to call for attention. The difficulty is that the mind often interprets this as emptiness rather than completion. Stillness is not the absence of intelligence. It is intelligence without movement. This is why many abandon the process here, not because it stopped working, but because it stopped entertaining. What is being asked at this stage is not more precision, not more discipline, but tolerance for quiet, a willingness to remain without trying to provoke sensation, to let the body exist without supervision. This can feel uncomfortable at first. Control has been mistaken for care for a long time. Releasing that habit may feel like neglect, even when it is not. Stillness is not passive, it is receptive. In this space, the deeper rhythms recalibrate. Breath finds its natural length. Tension redistributes. The nervous system confirms safety without needing demonstration. There is nothing to optimize here, nothing to improve, only a subtle trust to be rebuilt. Some days, resistance will return strongly, a sense of restlessness, a desire to abandon simplicity for intensity. When that happens, notice it as sensation, not argument. Restlessness has a texture, impatience has weight. They too are part of the language. The practice at this stage is not to dissolve resistance, but to include it, to let it be seen without being obeyed. Stillness does not mean you are finished. It means you have arrived at a layer that does not respond to force. And when you stop demanding response, something unexpected occurs. Quiet begins to feel supportive rather than empty. Neutrality begins to feel stable rather than dull. You realize that nothing is missing. The body is simply resting from being managed, and in that rest, a deeper orientation takes hold. One that does not announce itself, one that does not need to be felt, only trusted. Chapter 7. The Return. Before the mind gathers this into meaning, pause for a moment. If this space spoke to you, carry Temple of Wisdom with you. Stay connected. Share this if it feels right. The return is not a conclusion, it is a re-entry. Nothing here was meant to take you away from life, only to bring you back into it with less distance. You return to the same days, the same responsibilities, the same world, but something subtle has shifted, not in what you do, but in how you arrive. The body is no longer something you manage from afar. It becomes a place you pass through as you move. Listening does not stay confined to quiet moments. It threads itself into action, into speech, into rest. You may not notice this immediately, The return rarely announces itself. It shows up as a slightly softer response, a choice made with less force, a moment where you do not push past yourself. This is not withdrawal. It is participation without friction. The practice does not need to be remembered perfectly. It does not need to be repeated faithfully. What matters is that the orientation remains available. When tension appears, there is a way back. When noise returns, there is a way to settle, not by stopping life, but by inhabiting it more fully. The return does not make you calmer all the time. It makes you more reachable to your own signals, reachable to timing, reachable to what is actually happening. Nothing here promises permanence. There will be forgetting again, but forgetting no longer feels like loss. It feels temporary, because the path back is no longer abstract. It is felt. And that changes how you walk forward, not searching, not striving, simply responding from where you are. This is how the return completes itself, not as an ending, but as a way of continuing, quietly, honestly, present in motion.